The phone rang at 4 a.m., and Detective Sarah Chun knew someone was dead before she even answered it. The rain hammered against her apartment window like bullets, each drop a reminder that Seattle never slept peacefully. She'd been awake anyway, staring at the ceiling and replaying the Morrison case for the 100th time. 3 months. 3 months since the first body turned up in Pike Place Market, and they were no closer to catching the killer the media had dubbed the Clockmaker. Chan. We got another one. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice crackled through the phone. Queen N. Same signature. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She was already reaching for her clothes. Time. Called in at 3:02. Victim's name is Marcus Webb, 34, software engineer. Sarah. Rodriguez paused. This one's different. How different? He left a note, addressed to you. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the doorway of Marcus Webb's apartment, watching the crime scene techs work their methodical magic. The smell hit her first, not death, that would come later, but something else. Something metallic and sharp that made her nose wrinkle. Where's the body? She asked Officer Martinez, who looked green around the gills. Living room. But, Detective. Martinez swallowed hard. You're gonna want to see this. The living room was a study in precision. Marcus Webb sat in his favorite chair, a cup of coffee still warm on the side table. His eyes were closed, almost peaceful, if not for the thin line of blood that had dripped from his ear onto his white shirt. No signs of struggle, no broken furniture, no indication that he'd even known his killer was there. But it was the clock on the mantel that made Sarah's breath catch. An antique grandfather clock, its pendulum still swinging in perfect rhythm. And there, attached to the clock face with surgical precision, was a photograph. Her photograph. Damn, she whispered. Detective Mike Torres, her partner of 3 years, appeared at her elbow. The notes on the kitchen table. Forensics already dusted it. Sarah walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs. The note was written in the same neat handwriting they'd seen at the previous crime scenes. But this time, the message was personal. Detective Chun, you've been watching me, and now I'm watching you. Marcus was chosen because he reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone who asked too many questions. The others were practice. You are the purpose. The clock is always ticking. A friend. P.S. Check your apartment. Sarah's hands shook as she read the last line. Mike, I need to. Already sent 2 units to your place, Torres said. Sarah, who the hell is this guy? And why is he fixated on you? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Detective Chan? This is Officer Parks. We're at your apartment. You need to get down here. Now. The drive to her apartment felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's mind raced through the case files, looking for any connection she might have missed. The clockmaker had killed 4 people in 3 months. All different ages, backgrounds, neighborhoods. The only common thread was the clocks, antique timepieces left at each scene, always stopped at the exact time of death. Her apartment building was surrounded by police cars, their red and blue lights painting the night in violent colors. Officer Parks met her at the entrance, his face grim. We didn't find anything dangerous, he said. But what? You need to see your bedroom. Sarah's blood pressure spiked as she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. The door was already open, and she could see crime scene tape crisscrossing the hallway. Her living room looked normal. Same couch, same coffee table, same stack of case files she'd left scattered across the floor. But her bedroom was different. Every surface was covered with photographs. Not just any photographs, pictures of her. Coming out of the precinct, getting coffee at her favorite cafe, jogging through Volunteer Park, sitting in her car. Some of the photos were weeks old, judging by the clothes she wore. Others looked recent, very recent. In the center of her bed sat another antique clock. This one was a small mantel clock, its brass face gleaming under the harsh light of the crime scene lamps. A note was propped against it. Time is relative, detective, but death is absolute. Torres appeared behind her. Sarah, pack a bag. You're staying at a hotel tonight. I can't run from this guy, Mike. He's making it personal for a reason. Yeah, because he's planning to kill you. Sarah picked up the note, studying the handwriting. Something about it nagged at her. The careful loops, the precise spacing. She'd seen this before, but where? Mike, pull the Morrison file. The very first case. Sarah, what are you thinking? The first victim, Emma Morrison. She was a teacher, right? What did she teach? Torres was already on his phone, calling the precinct. Yeah, it's Torres. I need the Morrison file. What? Are you sure? He hung up and turned to Sarah. Elementary school. 3rd grade. But get this, she also taught adult literacy classes at the community center. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Who attended those classes? Sarah, the class rosters were destroyed in a fire 2 years ago. There's no record of. Wait. Sarah's pulse quickened. The handwriting. What if our killer was one of Emma's students? What if he learned to write from her? Torres stared at her. That's actually brilliant. But how do we prove it? We don't have to prove it. We just have to find him. The next morning, Sarah stood in the ruins of the Beacon Hill Community Center, which had burned down 2 years earlier. The fire had been ruled accidental, faulty wiring in the basement. But looking at the charred remains, she wondered if it had been something else entirely. You think he burned it down to cover his tracks? Torres asked, kicking at a piece of debris. I think our killer is very, very smart. And very, very patient. They spent the morning interviewing neighbors, former community center employees, anyone who might remember Emma Morrison's literacy classes. Most people remembered Emma, a dedicated teacher who'd volunteered her time to help adults learn to read and write. But the students were a blur of faces and names that no one could quite recall. It was Mrs. Chan, no relation, an elderly woman who lived across the street from the community center, who finally gave them their first real lead. Oh yes, I remember those classes, she said, pouring tea in her small kitchen. Emma was such a sweet girl. She had this one student who was different. Different how? Sarah asked. Intense. That's the word. He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Carried himself like he was angry at the world. Emma told me he was very intelligent, but he'd had a hard life. Never learned to read properly as a child. Do you remember his name? Mrs. Chen frowned. It was something with a J. John? James? No, wait. Jerome. Jerome something. He lived in that apartment building on the corner. The one that got torn down last year. Torres was already taking notes. What did he look like? Tall, thin, maybe 40 years old. Always wore dark clothes. Had these very pale eyes that seemed to look right through you. And his hands. She shuddered. His hands were always perfectly clean. Too clean, if you know what I mean. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Mrs. Chun, did you ever see him after the fire? Just once. Maybe 6 months ago. He was standing across the street, just staring at where the community center used to be. I waved, but he didn't wave back. Just turned and walked away. Back at the precinct, Sarah and Torres spent hours combing through databases, looking for any Jerome who might match their profile. The problem was, without a last name, they were searching for a needle in a haystack. Wait, Torres said, looking up from his computer. What if Jerome isn't his real name? What if he was using an alias for the literacy classes? Why would he do that? Because he had a record. Think about it, a 40-year-old man who can't read? That suggests either a learning disability or a very troubled childhood. Maybe both. Sarah nodded. Pull all the Johns and Jameses from the system. Cross-reference with any arrests in the Beacon Hill area from the past 5 years. They worked through the afternoon, building a list of potential suspects. By 6 p.m., they had narrowed it down to 12 men who fit the basic profile. But one name kept jumping out at Sarah. James Jerome Blackwood, she read from the file. Arrested 3 times for burglary, twice for assault. No convictions, charges dropped each time due to insufficient evidence. Torres looked over her shoulder. Why'd the charges get dropped? Says here the witnesses changed their stories. Or disappeared. That's convenient. Sarah studied Blackwood's mugshot. Pale eyes, thin face, the kind of features that could easily be forgotten. But there was something else in his expression. A coldness that seemed to reach through the photograph. Mike, look at this. His last known address was 1247 Beacon Avenue. That's 2 blocks from the community center. And look at this, Torres said, pointing to another line in the file. His mother died when he was 8. Father was arrested for child abuse and neglect. James was in and out of foster care until he aged out at 18. That explains the literacy issues. And possibly the rage. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Detective Chun? This is Dr. Patterson at Seattle General. I'm calling about Marcus Webb, the victim from this morning. The autopsy results are unusual. Unusual how? He wasn't killed by the injury to his ear. He was poisoned. Something called succinylcholine. It's a paralytic drug used in surgery. It would have paralyzed him completely while keeping him conscious. Sarah's blood ran cold. He was awake? Oh yes, he would have been aware of everything until the very end. The ear injury was post-mortem, probably to throw us off the scent. This killer wanted his victim to watch him die. After hanging up, Sarah stared at Blackwood's photograph. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. Mike, what if the first 3 victims weren't random? What if they were all connected to his past somehow? Torres pulled up the other case files. Emma Morrison, teacher. David Chin, wait, that's your last name.
Nori Laschen.
What about the others? Robert Foster, the second victim. He was a social worker. Worked with at-risk youth for 20 years before he retired. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. A teacher who tried to help him read. A social worker who might have been involved in his foster care. And David Chun, investment banker, doesn't fit the pattern. Wait, Sarah was already typing. David Chun. Here it is. Before he went into banking, he worked as a paralegal, specialized in child welfare cases. They stared at each other across the desk. He's killing people who were supposed to help him, Torres said, and saving the best for last. Sarah's phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. She'd been expecting it. Detective Chun. The voice was soft, cultured, with just a hint of a stutter that suggested years of speech therapy. Jerome. Pause. James, actually, though I suppose it doesn't matter now. You've been busy today. Why are you doing this? Because time is the only thing that matters, detective. And my time is running out. Sarah motioned for Torres to start the trace. What do you mean? I have cancer, detective. Stage 4. The doctors give me maybe 2 months. 3 if I'm lucky. So I decided to make my remaining time count. By killing innocent people? Innocent. The laugh was bitter. Emma Morrison pretended to care about helping me, but she gave up after 6 months. Said I was too challenging for her program. Robert Foster was supposed to find me a stable home, but he kept placing me with families who saw me as a paycheck. And David Chun. He was supposed to make sure I was safe, but he buried my case in paperwork and let me fall through the cracks. So you killed them. I gave them what they gave me. Nothing. I made them feel as helpless as I felt. And what about me? What did I do to you? Another pause. You caught the Richardson case. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The Richardson case. 5 years ago. A child abuse case that had gone cold when the primary suspect disappeared. You were the suspect. I was 12 years old, detective. 12. And you decided I was lying about what my foster father did to me. You closed the case and sent me back to him. The room spun around Sarah. She remembered now. A thin, scared boy with pale eyes who'd claimed his foster father was hurting him. But there had been no physical evidence, and the foster father had seemed so genuine, so concerned about the boy's welfare. James, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine. Where are you? Close. Very close. Detective, do you know what time it is? Sarah looked at the clock on the wall. 9:07 p.m. I asked you a question. It's 9:07. Wrong. It's time for you to pay. The line went dead. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the precinct in an eerie red glow. Sarah could hear shouting from the hallway, the sound of doors slamming, footsteps running. Everyone stay calm. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice echoed through the building. We have a power outage. Generators are coming online. But Sarah knew better. This wasn't a power outage. This was Jerome James making his move. Torres was already on his radio calling for backup. But Sarah knew it wouldn't matter. James had planned this too carefully, been too patient. He was already inside. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. 3rd floor. Records room. Come alone. Sarah, don't even think about it, Torres said, reading over her shoulder. He's not going to hurt anyone else if I cooperate. You don't know that. Yes, I do. This is about me. It's always been about me. Sarah checked her weapon and headed for the stairs. The 3rd floor was dark except for the emergency lighting, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The records room was at the end of the hall, its door standing open like a mouth. She found him sitting behind a desk, perfectly calm, perfectly still. James Jerome Blackwood looked exactly like his photograph except for the eyes. In person, they were even colder than she'd imagined. Detective Chun, thank you for coming. Let's finish this. Oh, we will. But first, I want you to understand something. I want you to understand what you took from me. On the desk between them sat another antique clock. This one was larger than the others, more ornate. Its pendulum swung back and forth with hypnotic precision. You were a child, Sarah said. I should have believed you. Yes, you should have. But you didn't. And because of that, I spent 4 more years in hell. 4 years of abuse, of violence, of being told I was worthless. Do you know what that does to a child, detective? Sarah remained silent. It breaks them. Completely. And when they try to put themselves back together, sometimes the pieces don't fit quite right. You can get help. It's not too late. It's been too late for 30 years. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. Succinylcholine. The same thing I used on the others. It doesn't hurt, detective. You'll simply stop. James, listen to me. No. You listen to me. I'm not a monster, detective. I'm a consequence. I'm what happens when the system fails. When the people who are supposed to protect children decide it's easier to look the other way. Sarah saw her chance. While he was talking, she'd been slowly moving her hand toward her weapon. But James was watching her carefully. I wouldn't do that if I were you. You see, I'm not the only one who's been wronged by the system. There are others. And if something happens to me before I finish what I started, they'll continue my work. You're lying. Am I? How many other children have you failed, detective? How many other cases have you closed without really trying? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow, because she knew the answer. There had been others. Cases that were too complicated, too time-consuming, too politically sensitive. Cases where it had been easier to accept the official story and move on. You're right, she said quietly. I failed you. I failed others. But killing me won't change that. No, but it will make me feel better. James uncapped the vial and began to pour the liquid onto a syringe. "Do you know what time it is, detective?" Sarah looked at the clock on the desk. 9:31 p.m. "It's time to." The shot echoed through the room like thunder. James looked down at his chest, where a red stain was spreading across his shirt. He looked up at Sarah with surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her smoking gun still pointed at him. "I'm sorry for everything." James nodded slowly. "The clock," he whispered. "The clock is still ticking." He slumped forward onto the desk, his blood pooling around the base of the antique clock. The pendulum continued its steady rhythm, marking time that James Jerome Blackwood no longer had. Epilogue. After the storm. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in her therapist's office, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt gray and heavy. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Better. Some nights." "And the guilt?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about what he said, about the other cases, about the children I might have failed." "James Blackwood was a killer, Sarah. You can't blame yourself for." "Can't I?" Sarah turned to face her therapist. "What if he was right? What if I did fail him? What if I failed others? What if you did? What are you going to do about it now?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question. "I want to go back, look at the old cases, the ones that were closed without resolution. See if there's anything I missed." That sounds like penance. Maybe it is, but maybe it's also justice. Dr. Martinez made a note on her pad. "Just promise me you won't try to save everyone. Some people can't be saved." Sarah nodded, but she wasn't sure she believed it. Because as she'd learned from James Jerome Blackwood, the line between victim and perpetrator was thinner than most people wanted to admit. And sometimes the only difference between the two was whether someone had been willing to listen. As she left the therapist's office, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The clock is still ticking." She deleted the message without reading it twice. But deep down, she knew James had been right about one thing. Time was running out for all of them, and there were still so many stories left to tell. The end.